welcome. Tonight, we travel back, far back, to a world both familiar in memory and alien in reality. A place whispered about in legend, imagined in countless retellings, ancient Sparta. You may already picture it. Bronze helmets glinting in the sun, rows of disciplined warriors, a land where every man seemed destined for battle. But beneath the myths and symbols, the real Sparta was something harsher, stranger, and less forgiving than most imagine. It was not a place designed for comfort, or kindness, or survival as we know it today. Imagine yourself there, walking along the dry earth of the Euratast Valley, the air warm yet heavy with dust. The mountains rise sharply on every side, their jagged outlines dark against a pale sky. The city itself is not adorned with splendor, no towering marble temples like Athens, no grand marketplace filled with luxuries. Instead, its buildings are simple, practical, and unassuming. Here, beauty is found not in art or architecture, but in the endurance of the body, the discipline of the spirit, the unrelenting rhythm of survival. For most of us, thrust suddenly into this ancient world, it would be nearly impossible to endure. Sparta was designed for a chosen few, and even among them, many did not last. From the first breath of life to the final march of death, existence in Sparta was measured by strength, loyalty, and sacrifice. Over the course of this journey, we will gently explore what it meant to live on, often to struggle in this unique society. We will trace the paths of daily life, meet figures both remembered and forgotten, and wander through mysteries of culture, archaeology, and tradition. We will see Sparta not just as a battlefield, but as a living, breathing community, defined by contrasts between the elite and the enslaved, between harsh training and rare moments of quiet, between myth and reality. So, settle in, allow the sound of history to carry you, steady and calm, as if lulled by the echo of distant footsteps on ancient stone. You need not strain to imagine it, or let the rhythm of this story unfold at its own pace. And now, we begin. Imagine waking in Sparta. The first light of dawn creeps over the jagged outline of Mount Taygetus. The air is crisp, cool, and faintly scented with the sharpness of pine drifting down from the slopes. The earth beneath your feet is dry, its surface powdered with dust that clings softly to skin and sandals alike. Unlike Athens, where mornings stir with the chatter of merchants and the scent of bread baking in crowded streets, Sparta wakes quietly. The city is not built around commerce or splendor. Its houses are plain, unadorned, made of simple stone and timber. Roofs sag slightly under years of weather, walls show their age. There are no painted frescoes, no columns gleaming white against the sun. What you notice instead is the absence of noise, the quiet discipline that hums beneath daily routines. As you walk the narrow lanes, you see children already at work. Not the gentle play of childhood, but exercises, drills, running barefoot over rough ground. Their faces are youthful, but their eyes hold the weight of expectation. In Sparta, even laughter feels measured, tempered by the awareness that every moment shapes them for what lies ahead. Water jars scrape softly as women carry them from the Eurotas River, their movements steady and practiced. These women are not hidden within their homes, as in many Greek cities. They move with strength, their bodies hardened by labor and training. For in Sparta, women too were expected to embody vigor, to ensure the endurance of future generations. Food is simple barley bread, cheese, figs when the season allows, and above all, the infamous black broth. The aroma is sharp, unfamiliar, almost bitter. It is not a meal designed for pleasure, but for function. To eat here is to fuel the body, not to delight the senses. And always, Behind the rhythm of daily life, there is an unseen presence, the helots, the enslaved population, who outnumbered Spartans many times over. They till the fields, gather the harvest, and perform the labor that sustains the city. You catch glimpses of them in the distance, bent over the soil, their movements marked by weariness. Without them, the Spartan way of life could not exist. Yet their existence is bound in quiet subjugation, a reminder that the freedom of some rests upon the chains of others. Even in these quiet hours of the day, discipline defines everything. Children are tested constantly, youths endure training without complaint, and adults live under laws that leave little room for choice. The rhythm of life in Sparta is not gentle, it is steady, strict, unyielding. For an outsider, even the simplest aspects of survival, eating, sleeping, speaking would feel restrained, foreign, demanding. Pause for a moment. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Eurotas River. The waters moving slowly, catching fragments of sunlight as they drift. Around you, the land seems deceptively calm. Yet within the city walls, every action, every breath, is shaped by a larger purpose. To serve Sparta, this was the heartbeat of daily life. Not indulgence, not individuality, but the collective, the discipline, the constant training for the role each person was destined to play. And so, from these rhythms of daily life, we begin to understand the foundation of Sparta itself. A city where survival was never guaranteed, and comfort was never the goal. To understand the soul of Sparta, we must walk in the shadow of a figure who is as elusive as he is foundational. His name was Lycurgus. Who was he? A man, a myth, or something between? Historians disagree, and the ancient Greeks themselves never truly knew. Some placed him in the 9th century BCE. Others believed he belonged to an even earlier age. A few thought him no man at all, but rather a symbol, a name given to the spirit of reform that reshaped Sparta forever. And yet, the Spartans believed in him deeply. To them, he was not just a founder, but a lawgiver, a guiding presence whose voice echoed across generations. Imagine him, if you will, a traveler, a thinker, a man who did not confine himself to the narrow valleys of his homeland. He is said to have crossed the sea to Crete, where he studied the laws and customs of another warrior people. He may have journeyed further east, into Asia Minor, where cities bustled with trade, music, and art. Everywhere he went, he observed, he listened, and he carried back with him not riches, but ideas. When he returned to Sparta, he found a city divided by wealth, ambition, and inequality. Powerful families vied for dominance. Luxury crept in from abroad. The people were restless. The land of the Eurotas was fertile, but the society itself was fragile. And so Lycurgus began to reshape it. His reforms were not soft adjustments, but sweeping transformations. He outlawed gold and silver, replacing them with heavy iron bars as currency. Imagine trying to carry such wealth. Awkward, heavy, impossible to hoard in secret. In this way, greed was dulled, and the pursuit of riches lost its meaning. Sparta would never rival Athens in trade, nor Corinth in wealth, but this was the point. The Spartans were to be equal, not in possessions, but in duty. Land was redistributed as well. Large estates were divided into equal portions, enough for each citizen to sustain his household. With this, inequality was softened, and the temptation of excess restrained. Every man was meant to stand on level ground with his neighbor. And then came the Syssitia communal mess halls. Picture rows of men seated shoulder to shoulder, bowls of the same dark broth before them. They did not dine in luxury. They ate plainly, together, and always with a reminder that no one was above the other. Even the kings of Sparta joined these meals, stripped of grandeur, bound by the same broth, the same bread. But perhaps the most enduring of his creations was the agoge, the training system that defined Spartan youth. From the age of 7, boys were taken from their homes. Imagine that moment. The warmth of family life suddenly replaced by the hard discipline of communal barracks. Childhood, as we know it filled with play and affection, was replaced by hardship, endurance, and constant testing. The agoge taught them not just to fight, but to obey, to endure hunger, pain, and deprivation. This was education, Spartan style, to read and write enough to function, to march and endure until the body obeyed without complaint, to learn that one belonged not to oneself, but to Sparta. Even women were shaped by his vision. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan women were trained physically, encouraged to run, to wrestle, to keep their bodies strong. Lycurgus believed that strong mothers would bear strong children, and in this way, women too served the state's relentless purpose. Religion was not forgotten in his reforms. Lycurgus traveled, it is said, to Delphi, where the oracle gave her blessing to his laws. Imagine the smoke rising from the temple, the Pythias voice drifting in rhythmic tones, declaring that his laws would endure as long as Sparta held fast to them. With this divine sanction, his reforms gained a sacred weight. To abandon them was not only treason against the city, but defiance against the gods themselves. And then, the story takes on a quiet, almost haunting note. When his reforms were complete, Lycurgus gathered the people. He asked them to swear an oath that they would uphold his laws, unaltered, until he returned. They agreed, and with that, he departed Sparta, walking once more into the wide world. He never came back. Some say he died in Crete, others that he simply vanished, choosing exile so his laws would remain eternal. By leaving, he bound Sparta to his vision forever. For how could they change the laws of a man who had never returned? In this way, Lycurgus became something more than human. He became timeless, his absence more powerful than his presence. He was not just the architect of laws, but the architect of an idea, that Sparta was not a city for the individual, but a city of discipline, endurance, and sacrifice. Imagine the weight of that legacy. To be a Spartan was to live in his shadow, to measure one's life not by personal desire, but by the vision of a man who might never have lived, yet lived on in every law, every meal, every moment of training. This was Lycurgus, a figure half real, half myth, a man, or perhaps an echo, whose voice still whispers through the stones of ancient Sparta. There are many mysteries that surround Sparta, but perhaps none are as quietly revealing as the meals they ate, the rituals they held, and the curious traces they left behind. Let us begin with a taste, or rather the absence of taste. The black broth. This dish has become one of the most infamous symbols of Spartan austerity. Ancient writers recorded it with both fascination and disdain. Imagine a dark liquid, thickened with pig's blood, vinegar, and salt. Into this broth, small pieces of pork were sometimes added, boiled until the flavor dissolved into the blackness. It was not made to please the tongue, but to strengthen the body. There is a story of a visitor from another Greek city who tasted the broth and recoiled. When told that Spartan warriors found it delicious, he remarked that such a taste could only be acquired after drinking with thirst and hunger. For the Spartans, this was not a meal of indulgence, it was a daily reminder that life itself was a kind of training. Picture the communal dining hall where it was consumed. Long benches, clay bowls set before each man, steam rising faintly in the lamplight. There is no chatter of feasting, no music, no entertainment, just the steady sound of eating, the occasional murmur of voices, the shared experience of nourishment stripped bare. Even the kings of Sparta, who held divine ancestry, sat among their citizens and partook of the same broth. For outsiders, this austerity was puzzling, even alien. How could a people who had the fertile valley of the Eurotas and access to the abundance of Greece choose such plainness? But to Spartans, this was the mystery of strength. Pleasure dulled the will. Discipline sharpened it. By rejecting delight, they embraced endurance. And yet, when we search for physical traces of this society, we are struck by another mystery: the absence of grandeur. Athens left behind the Parthenon, its marble columns glowing in the sunlight even today. Corinth left towering temples, sanctuaries, and mosaics. But Sparta left almost nothing. The ruins that remain are humble. Foundations of modest houses. Fragments of temples, far less imposing than those of other cities. Even their theatre, once built in stone, was simple compared to the splendor of neighboring states. Travelers from antiquity noted this as well. When the Greek geographer Pausanias visited Sparta centuries after its height, he found a city that seemed more like a village scattered across the land. It was deliberate. Lycurgus and those who followed him discouraged monumental building. Wealth spent on temples or palaces was seen as wasteful, a distraction from the Spartan way of life. What endured instead was intangible: the discipline of the people, the training of the body, the rhythm of daily life. And so, when archaeologists dig into Spartan soil, they find very little. Unlike Athens, where marble speaks across time, Sparta whispers in fragment shards of pottery. The outlines of barracks, the worn traces of sanctuaries dedicated to Artemis Orthia, even their graves were unmarked for centuries, for they believed equality should extend beyond life into death. The absence becomes its own kind of presence. You stand in the Eurotas Valley today, surrounded by fertile plains, the mountains looming silent and immense. You know that here, a society once thrived, feared and respected across the ancient world. And yet the stones do not tell their story. The earth is quiet. This too is a mystery of Sparta, that their greatest monument was never in marble or gold, but in the bodies and spirits of their people. They chose not to carve their pride into stone, but to live it day by day, until even their meals and their silences became a ritual of endurance. Imagine, then, the taste of that black broth lingering on your tongue, the quiet of an unadorned city around you, the weight of absence pressing as strongly as any ruin. This was Sparta's mystery. A people who left so little behind, and yet whose shadow stretches across history more than 2,000 years later. To understand Sparta fully, one must look not only at the warriors who filled its ranks, but also at the society that sustained them. Sparta was not a city of equals, though it claimed equality among its warrior citizens. It was a city of layers, of sharp contrasts, where survival depended upon one's place within its structure. At the top were the Spartiates, the full citizens. These men alone had the right to vote, to hold land, to join the Secessia, and to fight as warriors. Their lives were consumed by training, by discipline, and by service to the state. To be a Spartiate was both a privilege and a burden. Their role was clear, unyielding, and without escape. They were to serve as soldiers from youth until old age. And yet, citizenship was fragile. If a man failed in training, if he could not contribute to the communal meals, if his body faltered, he could lose his status. Equality among the citizens meant that failure was not tolerated. You were either strong enough to remain within the circle, or you slipped outside of it. Beneath the Spartiates were the Perioikotha dwellers around. These were free men, but not citizens. They lived in the surrounding towns and villages, engaged in trade, craftsmanship, and farming. Imagine them walking to market with bundles of goods, working iron into tools, shaping leather into sandals. They were necessary to the Spartan system, for the citizens themselves could not concern themselves with trade or craft. Yet the Perioko had no political power in the Spartan assembly. They lived in proximity, but not in equality. And then, at the bottom, were the helots, the enslaved population of Sparta. Their numbers dwarfed those of their masters, perhaps 7 helots for every 1 Spartiate. They were the ones who tilled the fields, harvested the crops, tended the flocks. Their labor allowed the citizens to focus entirely on war. Without them, the Spartan system would collapse, but their existence was precarious. The helots lived under constant surveillance, subject to harsh treatment, their lives marked by fear. Each year, the Spartan authorities declared a ritual war upon them, a symbolic act that allowed their mistreatment and even their deaths without religious consequence. The Cryptia, a kind of secret police composed of young Spartan men, would sometimes roam the countryside at night, striking fear into helot communities, ensuring that rebellion never grew too bold. Imagine the contrast. On one side, a Spartan citizen, trained from birth, his body hardened by discipline, his speech sharp and brief. On the other, a helot, bent beneath the weight of harvest, watching with quiet eyes as soldiers passed, knowing his labor fed their strength but would never grant him freedom. And then, apart from both men, stood the women of Sparta. Here, the contrast grows sharper still. In most of Greece, women lived in seclusion, confined to the home, their roles limited to weaving, raising children, and managing household affairs. In Athens, a respectable woman was rarely seen in public. But in Sparta, women moved freely. They trained their bodies with running and wrestling. They spoke with confidence, and they held influence within their households. Picture them in the fields, their figures lean and strong, their voices unafraid. They owned land, something unheard of in other Greek cities. They directed estates in the absence of men who were perpetually at war. Their words were sharp, their expectations fierce. One of the sayings attributed to Spartan mothers captures this perfectly. Handing a shield to her son before battle, she told him, "Return with it, or upon it." A command both stark and unbending: live as a warrior, or die as one. This unusual freedom gave Spartan women a reputation across Greece. Outsiders marveled at their boldness, their independence, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with disdain. But within Sparta, this was necessity. The city demanded strong mothers to bear strong children. It demanded women who could manage in the absence of men. Their roles were not softer, but equally bound to the state's relentless rhythm. So we see Sparta as it truly was. Not a single, uniformed society, but a layered one. A small circle of citizens bound by discipline. Surrounding them, the Perioiko, essential but politically silent. Beneath them all, the helots, enduring the weight of survival under constant watch. And across it all, the women, paradoxically freer than elsewhere, yet still serving the same ultimate purpose, to sustain Sparta's strength. The rhythm of life for each group was different. For the citizen, days passed in training, in communal meals, in preparation for war. For the helot, days stretched in toil, from the first light of dawn to the fading of dusk. For women, days were measured in management, in training, in raising children for a future not their own. Imagine standing at the edge of the Eurotas River once more, watching these layers unfold before you. A Spartan boy running barefoot, his small figure etched in discipline, a helot bending low, hands deep in the soil, eyes glancing up with quiet caution. A woman striding past, her movements unafraid, her voice carrying clearly across the fields. This was Sparta. Not equal, not gentle, but bound together by necessity. A society of contrasts, each life defined by its place, each rhythm sustained by the others. Imagine being 7 years old, small hands still soft, a child's laughter not yet silenced. Your world, until now, shaped by family, by the gentle voices of parents, by the warmth of a mother's embrace. And then, suddenly, it is taken away. In Sparta, at the age of 7, a boy was removed from his household and placed into the agoge, state-controlled education and training system. It was no longer the family that raised you, but the city itself. Picture it, a barracks-like hall, filled with other boys, the straw mats laid out for sleeping, the smell of simple meals drifting faintly through the air. The comfort of home was gone, replaced by uniformity, discipline, and constant watch. The agoge did not simply educate. It broke down the individual and rebuilt him into something Sparta desired. Obedient, strong, enduring. From the first day, the lessons began. They were not lessons in poetry or philosophy, though some reading and writing was taught. The real lessons were physical. Running barefoot across rough ground until the soles of the feet hardened, wrestling in the dirt until the body yielded to strength, enduring cold, hunger, and pain without complaint. The clothing was minimal, a single cloak, worn through the seasons. In winter, the cold clung to their skin. In summer, the dust. Shoes were rare. They ate little, enough to survive, but never enough to feel full. Hunger was a constant companion, sharpening not only the body, but the instincts. They were encouraged to steal food, but not to be caught. If caught, punishment was severe. The lesson was not in honesty or morality, but in skill. Learn to be cunning, learn to be resourceful, and learn to endure consequences with silence. Discipline was enforced not only by elders but by peers. Older youths watched over younger ones, guiding them, punishing them, shaping them. In this way, bonds of loyalty and hierarchy were forged early. Every boy knew his place. Every boy learned to look to older warriors as models of strength. And there was more than physical endurance. The agoge trained speech itself. Spartans became famous for their laconic, wit-sharp, concise words, never wasted. Boys were taught to speak little, to say much with few words, to let silence carry as much weight as speech. Even in their language, discipline reigned. Now imagine yourself older, 15, 16, 17. The body lean, hardened, movements quick and precise. Friendships have formed, but they too are shaped by the system. Loyalty is expected. Competition is constant. Punishments are endured quietly, for complaint was weakness. At 18, training reached its most demanding phase. These young men were not yet full citizens, but they were now tested in ways that pushed them to their limits. Some were chosen for the cryptic, secretive institution that required them to live alone in the countryside, armed only with daggers, surviving by their wits. Their purpose was not only survival, but to instill fear among the helots. Moving silently at night, striking swiftly, they were instruments of control as much as warriors in training. By the age of 20, a Spartan youth had completed the agoge, though his path as a soldier had only just begun. He now sought admission into a Sicilian, a communal mess. Acceptance required approval from existing members, and rejection by even one man meant exclusion. To be denied entry was devastating, for without it, full citizenship could never be achieved. For those admitted, adulthood in Sparta was not freedom, but another form of discipline. Meals were still communal, lives still directed by the state. Marriage was permitted, but even then, young men often lived in the barracks until the age of 30, visiting their wives only in secret, slipping into homes under cover of darkness. Family life, like everything else, was secondary to service. The agoge, then, was not just training. It was transformation. A boy entered as a child of his family. He emerged as a servant of Sparta. His identity dissolved into the collective. His body belonged to the army, his loyalty to the state, his very words shaped by discipline. Imagine again, standing at the edge of a training ground. Dust rises as boys run barefoot across it, their feet striking in rhythm, their voices sharp as they call commands. The sun burns down, but no one falters. In the distance, an elder watches, eyes steady, hands behind his back. Every stumble, every mistake is noted. And you realize, in Sparta, survival itself required more than strength. It required surrender to the agoge, to the system, to the idea that the individual was nothing, and the state was everything. This was the crucible in which every Spartan warrior was forged. And for most of us, placed within it, even for a single day, endurance would be nearly impossible. To be a Spartan was to be a soldier. Not sometimes, not only in crisis, but always. The rhythm of life itself was measured by preparation for war. Imagine now a line of men standing side by side. Each carries a heavy shield, the aspis round and broad, its bronze surface catching glimmers of sunlight. In his right hand a spear, long and steady. Across his body, armor of bronze or leather, the red cloak of Sparta draped across his shoulders. His stance is not his on it is part of a greater whole. This is the phalanx, a wall of men, shields overlapping, spears thrusting forward, each soldier's life bound to the man beside him. In Sparta, courage was not measured by individual heroics, but by remaining unbroken in this formation. To flee, to drop one's shield, was worse than death, for it endangered not just the self, but the collective. Imagine standing within that formation. Your shield presses against your left arm, heavy and unyielding. On your right, you feel the warmth of another soldier's shoulder, his shield overlapping yours. The air is filled with the faint sound of leather creaking, of feet shifting in dust, of quiet breaths drawn in anticipation. Ahead lies the enemy, silent for now, but waiting. The command comes, the line begins to advance. There is no rushing, no frenzy, only the steady beat of feet striking the earth, the rhythm of discipline carried forward. Dust rises. The sun grows hotter. You march in step, shield tight, spear angled. The strength of the phalanx is not in speed, but in unity. When battle comes, it is a test of endurance. Two walls of men colliding, pushing, heaving, straining. Spears strike forward, shields absorb the weight of blows. The noise is immense, metal on metal, voices shouting, the dull impact of bodies pressed together. Yet, within the chaos, each man knows his place. To break formation is to bring collapse. To endure is to bring survival. For Spartans, battle was not occasional, it was expected. Their reputation spread across Greece as unmatched warriors. At Plataea, at Mantinea, at countless smaller conflicts, they stood at the heart of the fight, their discipline feared by allies and enemies alike. And yet, war for a Spartan was more than the clash itself. It was the long march across rocky valleys, the nights spent under open skies, the meals eaten sparingly by the fire. It was the ritual sacrifices before battle, the calm words exchanged with comrades, the knowledge that home was far behind and uncertain. Picture a Spartan soldier on campaign. He sits upon the ground, shield beside him, spear across his knees. The sky is dim with stars, the night air cool. Around him, Murmurs drift through the camp. Men speaking quietly, sharpening blades, wrapping cloaks tighter against the chill. In the distance, the faint bleating of goats, the smell of smoke from a dying fire. It is a life of waiting as much as fighting, of patience as much as fury. And always the discipline holds. Songs were sung in unison to keep spirits steady, words carried on the air in rhythm with footsteps. Commanders were obeyed without question. Even in death, order was maintained. To fall in battle was not a tragedy, but an expected end. For a Spartan, life itself was a march toward that final moment of service. The Spartan shield embodied this truth. Heavy, broad, it was not only a defense for oneself, but for the man beside you. It was said that a warrior might lose his helmet or breastplate, for those protected only him. But to lose his shield was unthinkable, for it endangered the entire line. Return with it, or upon it. Spartan mothers reminded their sons, either survive holding it firm, or be carried back upon it in death. Imagine the silence after battle. The dust slowly settling. The cries of the wounded fading into quiet. The line still standing, though thinner, the shields scarred, the spears splintered. The Spartans did not celebrate with wild cheer. Victory was acknowledged with calm, with steadiness, with the unspoken knowledge that the duty had been fulfilled. And if they returned home, they returned not as individuals triumphant, but as parts of a whole, their discipline intact. For us today, accustomed to individual recognition, such a life seems almost impossible. To surrender so completely, to live without personal ambition, to dedicate body and spirit to the state. But for a Spartan, this was survival itself. It was their purpose, their pride, and their burden. Imagine once more the march rows of red cloaks moving steadily across the land. Shields gleaming faintly in the sun. Dust rising beneath disciplined feet. The rhythm is constant, unbroken. It is the sound not of men, but of Sparta itself. Though Sparta is remembered as a city of warriors, its life was not only measured by drills and battles. Beneath the armor, beneath the silence of discipline, there was another rhythm. The rhythm of the sacred. Religion was everywhere in Sparta. It was not confined to temples or festivals. It was woven into daily life, into training, into war. The gods were present in every oath, every sacrifice, every act of endurance. To be Spartan was to be devout, for without divine favor, discipline itself would falter. The most important of these gods was Artemis Orthia. Her sanctuary, nestled on the edge of the city, was a place of ancient ritual. Here, youths were tested in trials of endurance, sometimes even whipped at her altar as a demonstration of strength. Imagine the scene: the air heavy with incense, the chanting of priests, the sharp cries of boys proving their resilience before the goddess. Pain was not hidden, but sanctified, a bridge between human endurance and divine approval. Zeus, too, was honored as the king of gods, his blessing sought before battles. At every campaign, sacrifices were made, animals offered, smoke rising into the sky, the scent of burning flesh mingling with the dust of the earth. Only if the omens were favorable would the army march. Imagine the soldiers waiting in silence, their eyes on the priests. Every man's fate resting on the curling patterns of smoke, the glisten of entrails, the whispers of the divine. And then there was Apollo, whose oracle at Delphi gave sacred authority to Lycurgus himself. The Spartans often sent delegations there, seeking the god's words before making great decisions. The journey was long, the approach solemn, the outcome binding. Apollo's voice, spoken through the Pythia, was law as much as any decree of the kings. Yet religion in Sparta was not only solemn, it was also celebration. Festivals gave rhythm to the year. moments when the harsh discipline of daily life gave way to collective joy. One of the greatest was the Hyacinthia, held in honor of Hyacinthus, a youth loved by Apollo, who was struck down and transformed into a flower. The festival lasted 3 days. On the first, there was morning somber rituals, hymns sung slowly, the city remembering the fragility of life. But on the following days, the mood shifted. There were processions, feasts, and games. Imagine the streets alive with music, the sound of flutes drifting through the air, young men racing in contests of speed, families gathering beneath the summer sun. For a time, Sparta itself softened, reminded that joy too had its place. Another great festival was the Carnia, in honor of Apollo. It was a time of strict ritual, of tents set up across the city, of songs and dances performed in circles. The festival was so sacred that Sparta would often refuse to march to war until it was concluded. Even at the height of danger, when armies called for their aid, the Spartans paused, their devotion to Apollo outweighing even the urgency of battle. Imagine that stillness. Warriors waiting, their shields resting beside them, as the city turned inward to honor its god before lifting its spears once again. There were other rituals as well. The Gymnopedia, the festival of the dancing unarmed, where men, women, and youths performed naked dances in the public square. It was not scandalous, but sacred. Movements rehearsed, bodies in harmony, music carrying the rhythm of collective unity. It was a celebration of discipline transformed into art, of strength revealed without armor, of a society in motion together. In these moments, the harsh lines of Spartan life softened, though never vanished. Religion allowed them to step briefly outside of their endless discipline, yet it also reinforced it. For every festival was a reminder. The gods watched over them, judged them, sustained them. Imagine now a Spartan night during such a festival. Torches flicker along the streets, their flames dancing in the warm air. The sound of music rises, flutes' voices, the steady beat of feet in unison. The air smells faintly of roasted meat, of wine poured in libation to the gods. Families gather, children watching wide-eyed, elders recalling the same rituals from their youth. For a brief time, the city is alive with celebration, even as discipline lingers at its edges. And when the festival ends, when the music fades and the torches burn low, the rhythm of austerity returns. Training resumes. Meals return to simplicity. Shields are lifted once more. But for a moment, the people have breathed together, sung together, danced together, and remembered that even in Sparta, life was not only hardship, but also sacred rhythm. Thus, religion in Sparta was not a retreat from their way of life. It was its mirror. It sanctified their endurance. It gave meaning to their discipline. It bound the people together not only as warriors, but as a community, watched over by gods who demanded strength, order, and unity. Imagine the quiet after such a festival, the stars overhead, the valley hushed, the faint echo of flutes still lingering in your memory. In that stillness, you begin to understand. Sparta's soul was not only iron and dust, it was also faith, woven gently into every act of survival. Imagine stepping into a Spartan house. It is not grand, not adorned with painted walls or decorated pottery, as in Athens. The walls are plain, the roof low, the rooms simple. The air carries the faint scent of olive oil and smoke from the hearth, the quiet sounds of daily life unfolding. Yet even here, within the household, the presence of Sparta lingers. Family bonds exist, but always under the shadow of the state. Marriage in Sparta was unlike marriage elsewhere in Greece. In Athens, women were given in marriage young, sometimes as early as 12 or 13, and lived secluded, dependent on their husbands. In Sparta, things were different. Women married later, often in their late teens or early 20s, their bodies already strengthened by training and exercise. The belief was simple: stronger mothers would produce stronger children. The rituals of marriage could be unusual. Some accounts speak of a bride's head being shaved, her clothing exchanged for a man's cloak, her form hidden in the dimness of a chamber. The groom, even after marriage, did not live with her. Instead, he continued to reside in the barracks with his comrades until the age of 30. Visits to his wife were made in secret, often at night, brief and concealed. Family life, therefore, unfolded in fragments, stolen moments, rather than long days shared together. Yet within these households, women held unusual authority. They owned land, managed estates, and oversaw helots who worked the fields. Picture a Spartan woman standing at the threshold of her home, her posture strong, her voice confident as she directs workers, ensures the household runs smoothly, and prepares for the return of her husband if he returns at all. Her authority was not symbolic, it was practical, necessary. In a city where men were perpetually at war or in training, women became the anchors of the home. Children, too, were subject to the state from the very beginning. At birth, a newborn was presented before the elders. They examined the infant carefully, deciding whether it was strong enough to live. If judged unfit, the child was abandoned a harsh reality, but one rooted in the Spartan ideal that only the strong could serve the city. Imagine the weight of that moment for a mother, her joy at birth tempered by the judgment of others, her child's fate determined not by love, but by utility. For those deemed strong enough, childhood was brief. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their homes to enter the agoge. For a mother, this was both a sorrow and a source of pride. To give her son to Sparta was to fulfill her duty. From that moment on, her role shifted from nurturing to inspiring, urging him to embody strength, to uphold discipline, to return with his shield or upon it. Girls, meanwhile, remained in the home, but their lives too were shaped by the state. They trained their bodies with exercise, learning to run, to wrestle, to endure. Imagine groups of girls in the fields, their laughter rising as they race beneath the sun, their voices carrying strength rather than modesty. This freedom shocked outsiders, but within Sparta it was seen as vital. Strong women bore strong children. The household itself was plain, but filled with the quiet rhythm of necessity. Meals were simple bread, cheese, figs when the season allowed. The infamous black broth might be prepared, its bitter scent filling the air. Helots moved silently in the background, tending fires, fetching water, laboring without recognition. Their presence was constant, a reminder that Spartan freedom rested on the backs of others' toil. And always, the state intruded. Even in matters of family, personal choice was secondary. A citizen could not live fully within his home until the age of 30, and even then, his primary allegiance remained to the mess hall, the army, the collective. The home was permitted, but it was never central. It was tolerated as a necessity for producing children, but never allowed to overshadow Sparta itself. Imagine now a Spartan evening. The sun has set beyond Mount Taygetus, casting long shadows across the valley. Within the home, a woman sits by the fire, her figure illuminated in its glow. Beside her, children settle into quiet rest, their small forms wrapped in cloaks. Outside, the night is still, broken only by the sound of wind moving through olive trees. Yet even here, peace is not complete. The woman knows her husband is away, eating among his comrades, bound to the laws of the society. She knows her sons, if old enough, will soon leave for the agoge. She knows her daughters will be expected to marry, to bear, to endure. The home is hers, but it is not truly hers. It belongs, in the end, to Sparta. And so the Spartan household becomes a paradox. At once plain and powerful, stripped of luxury, yet filled with women of authority. A place of private bonds, yet constantly intruded upon by the demands of the state. Imagine yourself within that home. The walls close, the fire flickering, the air still with the weight of expectation. Here, as in every part of Sparta, life was never entirely your own. If you walk through the bustling agora of Athens in your imagination, you will hear the noise of trade merchants calling out, stalls piled high with olives, figs, pottery, perfumes. You will see gold coins changing hands, ships arriving in the port of Piraeus laden with goods from across the Mediterranean. Now imagine turning away from this scene, and instead stepping into Sparta. The difference is immediate. There is no crowded marketplace overflowing with foreign luxuries. No ships laden with silks or spices. The rhythm of Sparta's economy was not the rhythm of trade, but of simplicity, necessity, and deliberate restraint. Sparta's wealth came not from commerce, but from land. The fertile valley of the Eurotas provided fields of barley and wheat, groves of olives, and flocks of sheep and goats. Yet the citizens themselves did not farm these fields. That labor fell to the helots, the enslaved population who outnumbered the Spartans many times over. Imagine them at dawn, bent low in the fields, their hands roughened by soil, their movements steady under watchful eyes. The barley sways gently in the breeze, but for the helot there is no beauty in it, only survival and the constant weight of fear. For the Spartiate elite, this system provided freedom. They could dedicate themselves entirely to military life, because others carried the burden of their sustenance. And yet, this dependence bred tension. The helots were the backbone of the Spartan economy, but also its greatest threat. Uprisings were frequent, simmering beneath the surface. The Spartans lived always with a quiet awareness that their survival depended upon controlling those they enslaved. Their fear and their cruelty were part of the same system. Beyond the fields, the Spartan economy was shaped by deliberate rejection of wealth. Lycurgus, the lawgiver, had banned the use of gold and silver coins. In their place, Spartans used iron bars as currency. Picture it, a chunk of iron, awkwardly shaped, heavy, dark, with the sheen of metal. To carry wealth in Sparta was to carry weight in your hands. Impractical, inconvenient, and utterly worthless outside the city. This was no accident. By making currency burdensome, Lycurgus had stripped away the temptation of hoarding wealth or engaging in luxury trade. Sparta became a city where riches had no place, where luxury was suspect, where equality among warriors was enforced not only by law, but by the weight of iron itself. The result was striking. While other Greek cities displayed their wealth in temples, art, and fine clothing, Sparta remained austere. No painted pottery adorned their homes, no great statues filled their squares. To outsiders, it seemed barren. To Spartans, it was purity proof that their strength came not from gold, but from discipline. Trade did exist, but it was minimal. The Perioiko, the free but non-citizen inhabitants of the surrounding towns, handled crafts and limited commerce. They worked as blacksmiths, potters, carpenters, creating the tools and goods Sparta required. Imagine a Perioikos at his forge, the steady clang of hammer on iron ringing through the valley, sweat glistening on his skin. His work sustained the city, but he had no voice in its politics. Like the helots, his role was service, though his life was freer. The simplicity of the Spartan economy even extended into the household. Spartan citizens were forbidden from luxuries. Furniture was plain, meals modest, clothing functional rather than decorative. Even music and poetry were stripped down, valued for their rhythm and discipline rather than ornament. In every part of life, excess was rejected. And yet, beneath this austerity, Sparta did possess hidden wealth, not in gold or art, but in land and power. Its fields were wide, its helot labourers many. This paradox defined the Spartan system, outwardly simple, inwardly sustained by the silent work of others. Imagine walking through Sparta's streets. You do not see stalls overflowing with trinkets, but you do see quiet order. Men in simple cloaks, women with authority in their step, children moving in disciplined groups. The city feels bare, but also steady, its rhythm unbroken by the chaos of trade. For the modern mind, this economy seems almost unimaginable. A society that deliberately rejected wealth, that made money heavy and useless, that left little behind in art or architecture. And yet, for Sparta, this was strength. By denying themselves luxuries, they believed they denied weakness. By living simply, they believed they lived purely. But simplicity came at a cost. For without trade, without wealth, without art, Sparta remained dependent on the labor of others and left behind little to endure in stone. It was an economy designed not to flourish, but to survive. And for most of us, accustomed to comfort and choice, such survival would be its own hardship. Every society rises, and every society falls. Sparta was no different. For centuries, their discipline made them feared across Greece. They were spoken of as the perfect warriors, unyielding, unbreakable, the guardians of the phalanx. Yet beneath that strength lay fragility, flaws woven so deeply into their way of life that time itself would eventually unravel them. The greatest of these flaws was the very foundation of their system. The helots, Spartan warriors, were free to devote themselves entirely to military training only because others labored in the fields. But the helots were not passive. They resisted, rebelled, and endured with quiet defiance. Their numbers were vast, far greater than those of their masters, and so Sparta lived always in fear of revolt. Imagine the tension. Spartiate citizens marching to war, but leaving behind a countryside filled with restless helots. Even in victory abroad, the fear lingered. What if rebellion erupted at home? This anxiety forced Sparta to act with caution, reluctant to extend itself too far, tied down by the very system that gave it strength. Another weakness lay in numbers. Spartan citizenship was exclusive, inherited only through birth. Over time, war, disease, and the strict demands of the system reduced their ranks. Each generation, fewer and fewer true citizens remained. By the later centuries, the army that had once terrified all of Greece had shrunk, not from defeat, but from within. And then came the wars. In the 5th century BCE, Sparta and Athens stood as rivals, two great powers competing for dominance. Their struggle, the Peloponnesian War, lasted nearly 3 decades. Imagine years of marching, of sieges, of endless battles across land and sea. Eventually, Sparta triumphed, its discipline prevailing over Athens' wealth and fleet. For a brief moment, Sparta stood as the master of Greece. But this triumph was fleeting. Victory brought wealth, influence, and the temptations of empire. Sparta, which had long prided itself on austerity, found itself ruling over faraway lands, collecting tribute, maintaining garrisons. The simplicity of old began to fray. Contact with foreign luxuries, with new responsibilities, eroded the purity of the system Lycurgus had once envisioned. And then, In 371 BCE came the blow from which Sparta would never recover. At the Battle of Leuctra, the Thebans, led by the general Epaminondas, shattered the Spartan army. Their phalanx, once invincible, broke. The image of Spartan superiority collapsed in a single day. Imagine the battlefield, afterward the red cloaks scattered across the earth, the shields lying abandoned, the silence of defeat heavy in the air. With this loss, the myth of Sparta crumbled. Their enemies grew bolder, their allies turned away. The helots seized the moment, revolting, breaking free from their masters. Messenia, long enslaved, regained its independence. The foundation of Spartan strength, the land and labor of others, was gone. What remained was a shadow. The numbers of citizens dwindled even further. By the Hellenistic period, Sparta was no longer a great power, but a curiosity, its once proud traditions fading. Outsiders came to see the ruins of its training grounds, the remnants of its temples, and wondered at how a city so feared could fall so low. And yet, Sparta did not vanish entirely. Its reputation lingered, carried in stories and memories. Roman visitors, centuries later, admired its austerity, though they walked among ruins. Philosophers reflected on its laws, its discipline, its strange rejection of luxury. Even as the city declined, the myth of Sparta endured, becoming larger than the reality. Imagine standing among the ruins today. The valley is quiet. The Eurotas flows steadily. The mountains rise as they always have. The land has not changed, but the people who once gave it life are gone. You look for monuments, but find little. You search for grandeur, but find only fragments. And yet, in the silence, you can almost hear the echo of shields striking in unison, the distant rhythm of marching feet. The decline of Sparta was not sudden, but slow. It was the natural end of a system that demanded too much, that excluded too many, that relied too heavily on those it enslaved. It was undone not only by enemies, but by itself. This, too, is part of the lesson. Strength, when too rigid, can become fragility. A society that bends may endure. A society that refuses may break. Sparta chose the latter path, and in time, it crumbled. Imagine, then, the red cloaks fading into memory, the phalanx dissolving into dust. What remains is not the city itself, but the story, a story told across centuries, lingering even now, as you listen. Sparta fell long ago, its phalanx broken, its fields lost, its citizens dwindled until they were a shadow of what they had been. And yet, Sparta has never truly vanished. What endures is not the city itself, but the story. And stories, once told, can live longer than any walls of stone. To the Athenians, Sparta was both rival and paradox. They admired its discipline even as they scorned its austerity. In plays and speeches, Athens portrayed Sparta as stern, silent, almost inhuman, an image both admired and feared. To be called Spartan was to be called simple, tough, unbending. Even their laconic speech became legend, a single sharp sentence, a word where others would write a page. To the Romans, Sparta was a mirror of their own ideals. They saw in the Spartan devotion to discipline and endurance a reflection of what they believed had once made Rome great. Roman writers told stories of Spartan boys who endured pain without a sound, of mothers who sent their sons to war with fierce pride. These tales, polished and repeated, became less about reality and more about example. And so the myth grew. Sparta became not just a city, but an ideal used by others to measure themselves, to imagine purity, to dream of strength stripped of luxury. Even centuries later, in the modern world, the myth remains. Books, films, and speeches return again and again to Sparta, often romanticizing its warriors while overlooking the harsher truths. The Battle of Thermopylae, where a few hundred Spartans stood against the vast Persian army, has become a story retold endlessly. Yet the real Thermopylae was far more complex, with thousands of Greeks from other cities fighting alongside them, and the Spartans themselves compelled by duty rather than free choice. Still, the image endures. Men in bronze armor, standing unyielding, their discipline immortal. It is an image carefully cultivated through centuries, often larger than the reality. But the legacy of Sparta is not only strength, it is also silence. For unlike Athens, which left us plays, philosophies, and written histories, Sparta left little in its own voice. What we know of them comes mostly from outsiders, Athenian critics, Roman admirers, later historians. Imagine trying to understand a person only through the words of their rivals or strangers. So it is with Sparta. What we remember is as much myth as truth. Yet myth itself is powerful. It allows us to see what others valued, what others feared, what others longed for. When Athenians told tales of Spartan simplicity, they were also reminding themselves of their own complexity. When Romans praised Spartan endurance, they were also lamenting what they felt they had lost. And when modern storytellers retell the same battles, they are not speaking of Sparta alone, but of our fascination with strength, with sacrifice, with survival against odds. Imagine, then, the valley of the Eurotas today. The air is still, the river winds quietly, the mountains rise unchanged. The city is gone, but the name remains. The myth remains. You can stand among the ruins and still hear it, whispered Sparta. It is both memory and imagination, history and legend. A city that would not bend, and so it broke. But, in breaking, it became something else. A story that outlived itself. And in that way, Sparta did survive, just not in the way its warriors might have imagined. If you close your eyes and imagine yourself in Sparta, truly imagine, the distance between their world and ours begins to reveal itself. We live in a world of abundance. Warm houses that shelter us from winter's chill. Meals flavored with spices gathered from across the globe. Clothes that change with the seasons. Beds that soften the body into sleep. We are surrounded by choice, comfort, and individuality. Now imagine that fading away. In Sparta, choice was not yours to keep. From the moment you were born, your life belonged to the state. Whether you lived or died as an infant, whether you trained as a boy, whether you spoke as a man was measured not by personal desire, but by usefulness to the city. The comforts we take for granted, soft beds, varied foods, private meals, did not exist. You would eat the same bitter broth day after day, your hunger never fully satisfied. You would sleep on hard bedding, your cloak your only covering, your body exposed to the cold. The walls around you would be bare, without decoration, without softness, without distraction. Even family life, which we hold so closely, was restrained. A child left home at 7, a husband lived apart from his wife until 30. Mothers and fathers surrendered their children to the agoge, without question. Imagine the quiet ache of separation, the brief, hidden visits, the knowledge that personal affection was always secondary to collective duty, and then the constant weight of discipline, every step measured, every word trained, every glance observed, the body hardened by exercise, the spirit pressed into obedience. Punishment not for wrongdoing alone, but for failure to endure. Imagine hunger gnawing at you, cold seeping into your bones, pain stinging your body, and being expected to remain silent, calm, and unmoved. For us, survival in Sparta would not simply be a question of physical strength. It would be a question of surrender. Could we give up individuality? Could we live without comfort, without wealth, without privacy? Could we let the state decide our fate, our family, our very existence? Most of us could not, for even if our bodies endured the hunger and the cold, our minds, shaped by a world of choice and freedom, would falter beneath the weight of such control. And yet, in reflecting on Sparta, there is also a strange contrast to consider. Their world was harsh, but it was also steady. They did not fear hunger as we fear it, for hunger was constant. They did not long for comfort as we do, for comfort was absent. Their lives were simple in a way ours can scarcely imagine, pared down to duty, survival, and service. For some, this simplicity may even seem appealing, a release from the noise and complexity of modern existence, a life where roles are clear, where purpose is given, where strength defines survival. And yet, the cost of such simplicity was immense. Freedom was surrendered, beauty was restrained. Individual lives were small, bound always to the state, their voices lost in the collective rhythm. Imagine standing at the threshold between their world and ours. On one side, the soft glow of electric lights, the hum of technology, the abundance of modern kitchens and markets. On the other, the dim torchlight of Sparta, the bitter taste of black broth. The steady beat of bare feet striking earth in endless training. Two worlds, separated by centuries, yet both real. One of comfort, one of discipline. One of abundance, one of restraint. And so we return to the question, why would we not survive in ancient Sparta? The answer is not simply because life was hard. Many peoples of the past endured hardship. The answer is because Sparta demanded not just endurance, but surrender. Surrender of comfort. Surrender of individuality. Surrender of family bonds, of personal dreams, of private choice. We live in a world that values the self. Sparta lived in a world that valued only the city. And in that difference lies the greatest divide of all. And so, our journey through ancient Sparta comes to its end. We have walked its dry, dusty paths, where the mountains rise sharply against the sky. We have stepped into the simple homes, plain and unadorned. We have sat in the communal halls, tasting the bitter broth. We have felt the weight of the shield in hand, the press of bodies in the phalanx. We have glimpsed the festivals, the rituals, the rhythms that bound the city together. And we have seen, too, the contrasts, the citizens, the helots, the women, the children, the strength that gave Sparta its renown, and the fragility that led to its fall. Through it all, one truth has emerged. Sparta was not a place for comfort. It was not a place for softness. It demanded endurance, discipline, surrender. For most of us, thrust into that world, survival would be fleeting. The very things we hold dear, freedom, comfort, individuality, would have no place there. But here, in our own world, they do. As you rest now, let that contrast settle gently in your thoughts. The softness of your bed beneath you, the warmth of your home, the abundance and choices that surround you each day. These are things the Spartans could never have imagined. History offers us many lessons, but perhaps the quietest is gratitude. By looking back at lives so harsh, so unyielding, we can feel more deeply the ease of our own. So breathe deeply. Let the weight of Sparta drift into the distance, its red cloaks fading into the dust of time. Let the sound of marching feet dissolve into silence. Let the harshness of their world slip away, leaving only the calm of the present moment. You are here, you are safe, you are free. And now, as this story comes to a close, Soft music will play on, calm and steady, to carry you further into rest. Let it wash over you, a gentle rhythm beyond words, guiding you quietly toward sleep.